At first glance, it might sound ordinary, just a conversation across the living room on a quiet afternoon. But when Richard, my husband's brother, spoke with such raw honesty, it was like the walls around my heart cracked open. I wasn't prepared for the weight of his words, the sincerity in his eyes, or the way it made me question everything I thought I knew about trust, family, and myself. Sometimes the truth doesn't break you. It rearranges you piece by piece until you're someone new. Before I dive in, tell me, where are you watching this from? Which city? Which place are you tuning in from right now? I love knowing the little corners of the world this story will reach. It makes me feel like we're sitting together, just talking, like friends across the table. My name is Susan. I'm 51 years old, and I've been married to Michael for nearly 3 decades. My life was steady, predictable, and maybe even a little too quiet. Our children had grown up and moved away, leaving me and Michael in a house that felt too big, too silent. And then there was Richard, Michael's younger brother. He was always around in small ways, never intrusive, just present. He'd show up at Sunday dinners, bring over tools when something broke, or simply sit on the porch with us when the summer nights stretched on. Richard had a kind of warmth about him, but it was wrapped in shadows. He carried the weight of his own life, losses, regrets, the things people don't always say out loud. I noticed that in him, maybe because I felt some of those shadows in myself. Life has a way of piling silence on top of silence until you can hardly hear your own thoughts. And Richard, well, he seemed to know how to break through silence without even trying. It was one late afternoon in early fall when it all began to shift. The air smelled like wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney, and the golden light streamed across my kitchen table. Michael had gone on a short business trip, nothing unusual, and Richard had come over to help fix a leaky pipe in the downstairs bathroom. I remember hearing the clink of his tools, steady and rhythmic, and the occasional sigh when something didn't fit just right. I offered him coffee, which he accepted with that quiet nod of his. When he finally sat down, his hands were rough and damp from the work, and he cradled the mug like it was something more than just coffee, like it was a small comfort. For a while, we just sat in silence, sipping, letting the tick of the clock fill the air. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Susan, do you ever feel like honesty costs too much?" I looked at him, startled. His eyes weren't on me, but fixed on some far-off memory. His voice was low, thoughtful, almost trembling. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. He set the mug down and rubbed the back of his neck. "I mean, people ask for the truth, but when you give it to them, it changes everything. It cuts too deep. Sometimes I wonder if it's better to just stay quiet." His words hung there heavy, and something in me stirred because I knew exactly what he meant. For years I'd swallowed thoughts, smoothed over arguments, let silence fill the spaces where I should have spoken. I leaned forward, my voice softer than I expected. "But silence changes things too, doesn't it? It eats away at you." That was when he finally looked at me. Really looked. His gaze was steady, unflinching, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. There was no pretense in his eyes, no polite mask, just honesty, raw and unsettling. And then he told me something I wasn't prepared to hear. It wasn't a confession of love or some secret betrayal. It was his truth stripped bare. He spoke about mistakes he had made years ago, things he had hidden from his family, including Michael. Choices that still haunted him. He admitted how alone he often felt, how he feared he would always be the shadow beside his brother, never quite his own man. His words cracked something in me, not because of the details, but because of the courage it took to speak them. I remember my hands trembling slightly on the mug, the warmth seeping into my skin while his words seeped into my heart. I wanted to reach across the table to ease that weight from him, but I stayed still. All I could do was listen, and in listening I felt something unexpected bloom inside me. Respect, tenderness, and a connection I hadn't known was possible. The room seemed smaller and more intimate, as though the walls themselves leaned in to catch his honesty. Outside the world carried on, cars passing, leaves rustling, but inside it was just us, suspended in a moment that felt larger than time. When he finally stopped speaking, his voice from the effort, I whispered, "Thank you for trusting me with that." My words came out shaky but sincere. He gave me a faint smile, almost a relief, and nodded. I didn't know who else to tell. In that instant, something shifted between us. It wasn't about romance or betrayal. It was about truth, about two people daring to be vulnerable in a world that often demands silence. And though I knew it would complicate things, I also knew I couldn't pretend that moment hadn't happened. It had, and it changed me. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the table, I realized his honesty had shaken me, not because of what he revealed, but because it reminded me of my own silence, of all the truths I had tucked away over the years, waiting for the right moment that never seemed to come. Richard had given me a gift I hadn't expected, permission to feel, to speak, to be honest, too. And that was only the beginning. The night after Richard spoke his truth, the house felt like it had been rearranged while I wasn't looking. The furniture was the same. The kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner, but the air carried that charged quiet you feel after a thunderclap, the kind that leaves your chest buzzing. I washed the two mugs slowly, rinsing the brown rings from their rims, watching the foam drift over porcelain like low lake fog. From the window above the sink, the maple trees out back swayed against a sky the color of pewter. I could hear Richard outside on the porch, checking that he turned off the water line to the downstairs bathroom. He moved with the solid certainty of a man who made a living with his hands. No fuss, no wasted motion. Yet something about him seemed lighter than it had that morning. He put down a piece of the load he'd been carrying. Somehow, without realizing it, a piece of mine had loosened too. When I joined him, the porch boards gave a soft complaint under my feet. He stood by the railing with his jacket unzipped, fingers tucked in the pockets like he needed to keep them from reaching for the past. Streetlights clicked on down the block in a staggered chain, one warm halo after another, while a neighbor's radio murmured ball scores through an open window. "Pipe steady for now," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "I'll come by in the morning to replace it proper. Didn't want to keep you up banging around with copper and flux." "You can keep me up," I said, then felt the heat rise in my face. I mean noise. The noise can keep me up. Not you, obviously. He smiled, small and unshowy, the way a man smiles when he forgives you for being human. "I knew what you meant," he said, and then he didn't let me bury myself in embarrassment. He pointed at the clouds sliding in from the west. "Rain coming. You can smell it if you breathe slow." I did. He was right. That damp metal scent that rides the wind just before the first drop falls. The world held its breath. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally, my voice softer than the night. "Shoot. When you're honest like that, when you pull something out that's been stuck inside for years, do you feel worse at first or better?" He leaned his elbows on the railing. "Both. Like setting a broken bone. It hurts. And then you remember what standing straight feels like." I nodded, the words dropping neatly into a place I didn't know I'd been saving for them. For so long I'd been the keeper of calm in our family, the peacemaker, the hostess, the one who could set a table and a tone, no matter who was coming through the door. I had grown skilled at smoothing surfaces, but last night had shown me the price of always being lacquer. Nothing truly seeps in, and nothing truly breathes. "Would you?" I hesitated, surprised by what I was about to ask. "Would you drive with me for a bit? There's a stretch of road by the reservoir where the lights look like they float on water. I think better when the world is moving past me." "Now," he said, looking out at the dark that had thickened around us. "Now," I said, "if you're up for it." He held my gaze a second, measuring the edges of the moment, then nodded. "Let me grab my keys." We didn't announce anything to anyone. No note, no explanation. I took my old green cardigan from the hook, and he took the truck, the bench seat worn into a comfortable cradle by years of early mornings and late returns. The heater coughed, then warmed to our knees. On the dash, an old street Christopher medal swung gently against a coil of electrical tape, tapping out a tiny silver metronome. We drove in the kind of silence that isn't empty. Mailboxes flicked past like steady punctuation, the streets of our neighborhood giving way to a two-lane stretch lined with pines. The rain arrived as promised, first a scatter of nervous drops on the windshield, then a drum line. Wipers swept in shore arcs. The road lifted and fell under us, and for a while it felt like being rocked in a pair of big, quiet hands. I didn't tell you everything, I said once the reservoir came into view. Black water holding a nervous mirror of the sky. Or maybe I didn't tell myself. Michael and I are fine. We're steady. But somewhere along the way, I got so good at being fine that I misplaced the part of me that speaks up. I think I've been keeping the peace by keeping quiet. That's a hard habit to break, he said. Silence pays you in compliments. People call you strong, easygoing. Meanwhile, it's charging interest on your soul. I laughed, surprised by the sound of it in the camp. You talk like a man who's argued with silence before, since I was a kid. Didn't want to be the second son making noise while the first one shined. He cut his eyes at me, not self-pitying, just stating weather facts. Michael earned his shine. He's a good man, but it can be easy to measure yourself by someone else's yardstick and call it honest. We pulled into the small gravel turnout by the boat ramp. Rain softened the edges of everything. The chain-link fence, the orange life ring hanging on its post, the no swimming sign that the county had replaced 3 times in as many summers. The reservoir carried the town's lights like small patient lanterns. I breathed in the damp air and let it out slowly. Here's the part one didn't say, and I continued. When you told me your truth today, it didn't scare me. It invited me. I don't mean. I fumbled, careful with the boundary line. I could feel like twine underfoot. I don't mean it invited me to betray anything. It invited me to risk being honest back with you, with Michael, with myself. Richard looked out at the water. Then say what you need to say, Susan. I can take it. And if it's not mine to carry, I can sit with you while you figure who to hand it to. So I spoke. I told him about the way the house had grown quiet after the kids left, how Michael had filled the silence with more work, and I had filled it with committees and church breakfasts, with recipe swaps and neighborhood drives. I told him how sometimes I talked around things with Michael because I didn't want to weigh him down just when he seemed to be climbing something invisible. I told him about a fight we'd had the winter before last that I still carried in a pocket I rarely turned out, the night I'd asked Michael if he still saw me, not just the meals I made and the appointments I kept, and he'd said, of course, in a tone that ended the conversation instead of deepening it. I told him how my shoulders had learned to hold a sigh without letting it out. Richard didn't fix it. He didn't offer me a joke or a tool. He listened like he'd been taught by loss how to leave quiet space where someone else's truth could expand. When I finished, the wipers paused in the center of the windshield like they were considering a reply. I think, he said finally, you might be giving Michael exactly what he thinks you want. No ripples. He's running his race, and he believes the best gift he can give you is a smooth lane to stand in and clap from. I don't want a lane, I said before I could soften it. I want company. Then you got to ring the bell, Suz. He said it tenderly, using a nickname he'd never used before and might never use again. You got to say it out loud for real. Men our age. He stopped, corrected himself with a smile. Men Mike's age and moaning. We don't always hear the quiet half of a sentence. We're trained for pressure for problems. Sometimes you have to put the truth on the table like a blueprint and tap it with your finger. Will you be there when I do? I said, not to gang up on him, just so I don't back away from it at the last second. If you want me there, I'm there, he said. But it ought to be the two of you who built the bridge. I'll hold the ladder. We sat with that. The rain dialed itself down to a whisper. A pair of headlights slid across the far bank and then were gone. Somewhere in the dark, a frog performed its small, steady work of calling out and being answered. When we headed back, I felt different in the seat beside him. Not lighter, exactly, more rearranged, the way a room feels after you've pulled the couch away from the wall and discovered space where there was only dust before. He pulled into my driveway and cut the engine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he turned to me with a seriousness that put both our feet flat on the ground. We're family, he said. Whatever else today has been, we keep it honest and we keep it clean. No secrets that make more secrets. That okay with you? Yes, I said, grateful that he named it. That's exactly what I want. He nodded like we'd shaken hands on a contract, then gave me that small unchy smile again. I'll be back at 9 to swap the pipe, he said, already half out of the truck. Get some sleep, Susan. You're going to need your voice tomorrow. I didn't sleep much, but I did rest in the decision. I would speak to Michael that night when he got home. No preamble. No apology for having a heart. I made coffee in the morning and eggs at noon and a pot roast that made the house smell like Sundays when the kids were small. I set 3 plates at the table without thinking, then replaced one with a plastic container for Richard to take with him, and I caught myself smiling. He worked with the quiet focus of someone who understood that mending a thing right is its own kind of prayer. Copper sang under his torch. When he was done, he left the basement cleaner than he found it. Close to 7, the garage door rumbled, and the automatic light threw Michael's shadow long across the entry hall. He looked tired in the way men look tired after being respectable for too many days in a row. Tie tucked in his pocket, jaw set like a gate. He kissed my cheek, breathed in the roast the way a child breathes in a promise, and rested his hand on my shoulder a second longer than he usually does. Maybe he too could smell rain coming. We ate without pretense. I told him about the little things, the woman at the grocery store who insisted on paying with nickels, the surprise goldfinch that had flashed past the kitchen window like a coin flipped by God. He told me about a client who wanted a guarantee no one could give, and the joke a colleague made that had carried him through lunch. We were kind and confident together, the way people are who've built something that holds. And then, because the moment asked for it, and because I had promised a man at a reservoir I would ring the bell, I put my fork down and folded my hands on the table like I was about to pray. I need to tell you something, I said to Michael. And I need you to listen like the answer isn't already decided. He straightened, alert in the way a good man gets when he senses the ground shifting, but trusts the person who's standing on it with him. Okay, he said, I'm listening. So I told him, not everything at once, and not with any flair for drama, just the straight boards of it, laid side by side, that Richard had come by to fix the pipe, and had told me some hard truths about himself. That hearing him stirred something in me. I didn't know how to put away quietly. That I love our life, and I also want to be seen inside it, not just applauded for keeping it smooth. I told him about the winter night. I'd asked if he still saw me, and how his, of course, had felt like a hallway with all the doors closed. I told him I was tired of holding my breath. Michael didn't interrupt. He didn't move even, except for one small muscle feathering along his jaw. When I finished, the house made the tiny settling sound it makes in the evening. The wood-remembering sun. Out on the porch, the wind chime we'd bought on a whim last spring offered a single careful note. All right, he said, and his voice scratched in a way that made me realize how much it costs a proud man to say those 2 words. All right, I hear you. He looked down at his hands, big and reliable and suddenly uncertain. I didn't know, he added quietly. I mean, I knew the way you know a road's got a bend because you drive it every day. But I didn't know the bend had a guardrail gone. I reached across the table and rested my fingers on his wrist. I didn't tell you. I made everything look easy because I thought that's what you needed from me. Maybe I needed it too. But I don't want easy anymore if it cost us seeing each other. He turned his hand over and held mine. There was a boy's vulnerability in his eyes, softer than I'd seen in years. What do you want me to do, Susan? Give me a step. I can take a step. Come for a walk with me after dinner, I said. No phone, no plan, just a slow one around the block. And after that, once a week, can we have an hour where we sit at the table with no TV on and talk like we used to about real things? You can bring whatever's heavy for you, too. I'm not the only one who forgets to set stuff down. He exhaled like someone who'd been told the test is open book after all. I can do that, he said. I want to do that. I hesitated, then added the part that would be hardest to say and yet easiest to live with once it was out. And I invited Richard to stop by later this week. Not to referee, just to be in the room for the first 10 minutes while I say some of this out loud. Hearing him yesterday is what got me here, and I want him to see me follow through. If that isn't okay, I'll call him and change it. Michael's gaze shifted, then settled. I braced myself for jealousy or suspicion, for the trapdoors that opened when 3 people carry a single conversation. But he surprised me the way he's been surprising me since he was 20 when we married, and he showed up late to our own reception because he'd stopped to help a stranger change a tire. Invite him, he said after a beat. He's my brother. If he helped you find the words, I can be a man who is grateful for that rather than threatened by it. He swallowed. Besides, I think I owe him a conversation, too. I've been busy shining, as he used to say. That cracked something open in me the way the truth had cracked something open in Richard. Not a breaking, a rearranging. I squeezed Michael's hand. We finished dinner like people who had just found the hinge that had always been there but had grown stiff from disuse. Later we walked. The neighborhood offered its ordinary mercy. Porch lights flicked on. Dogs announced themselves. A boy on a bicycle practiced a one-handed turn and hooped when he kept his balance. We didn't talk much at first. Then, as our feet found a rhythm, words came easier. He told me about a fear he kept to himself, that retirement might come for him like a quiet thief, and he wouldn't know who he was without a briefcase. I told him about the volunteer work I'd wanted to try, but hadn't brought up because I worried it would look like I'd traded our home for a new place to take care of. We made no grand promises. We put one sentence next to another and trusted the line they made. When Richard came by 2 evenings later, he brought a box of donuts, like he was showing up for a job site with the right currency. He stood in our doorway looking like a man who had learned how to wear humility without making it a costume. Michael hugged him first. It wasn't a cinematic moment, no swelling music, but something level and important passed between them. The three of us sat at the table with coffee and let awkwardness be a guest until it yawned and went home. I said some things to Susan the other day, Richard began, turning his cup slowly, that I should have told somebody a long time ago. I don't want to keep my life in a locked drawer anymore. Not if it means I keep locking people I love out. Michael nodded. I've kept busy, he admitted, and I've called it providing. I didn't see what I didn't want to see. That stops now. We didn't inventory the past. We didn't try to grade our failures on a curve. We made a plan instead. Small, human, doable. Tuesday nights would be ours for conversation. Once a month, the brothers would have breakfast at Vince's diner and talk like men who share blood in years rather than competition. I would visit the community center about the reading program I'd been circling for months. And the next time any one of us felt the urge to smooth an uncomfortable moment into silence, we would say blueprint out loud as a gentle joke, a reminder to put the truth on the table and tap it with a finger. After Richard left, the house was quiet in a new way. Not the loneliness of a place where words had settled like dust, but the calm of a room that had just been swept. Michael and I stood in the kitchen rinsing cups. He bumped my shoulder with his just enough to say I'm here. I bumped him back just enough to say I know. That night before sleep, I stood at the window and watched the maple tree stirring in the dark. I thought about how many times in a long marriage you are asked to become Brady in a way you didn't expect. How many times family presents you with a door you didn't plan to open and asks for your hand on the knob anyway. Richard's honesty had shaken me. Yes, but not like a storm shaking a house. More like a good carpenter tapping a stud to find the strong part of the wall. It makes a different sound when you hit it. Deeper, truer. You learn where to anchor things. In the weeks that followed, we kept our blueprint word. We talked on Tuesdays. Sometimes we laughed, and sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we sent the wrong thing and had to circle back. Michael went to Vince's with Richard, came home smelling like coffee and fryer oil, and told me stories that made him a little boy again for a moment. I signed up at the community center and read to a row of first graders who regarded me as a magician for turning marks on a page into worlds. The house didn't get louder. Exactly. It got realer. Even the silence felt earned. One afternoon in late fall,